That morning began with a knot that was difficult to explain, the kind of pressure that comes not from a single worry, but from a pile of poorly sealed memories. Maya had gone years without crossing the iron gate of the family home, and returning for her grandmother's 85th birthday was like placing her body in a place that preserved every crack of what had hurt. Sierra's call had sounded appropriate, kind, with those measured words one uses when trying to convince someone that everything is okay. She said there would be a surprise, cake, old photos, longtime neighbors. She also said that Grandma would be happy if Maya showed up. Jake listened to the proposal, didn't argue, but let slip a logical mistrust. Too much order for a family that was never orderly. Even so, his love for Rose outweighed the issue. The plan was simple. Arrive early, stay together, observe without anticipating a fight, and leave if anything seemed odd. The car continued along familiar streets, with trees that no longer provided the same shade, while Maya felt like someone entering a strange house even though she knew the route by heart. The facade had hardly changed, and that, rather than being reassuring, produced a strange effect, as if time had been stuck in a photograph. The gate still had rust on its corners, the same old chain was still hanging from the same nail, and the hallway tiles had the same sunken tiles that Rose mentally marked so she wouldn't trip. Inside, however, the atmosphere was different, a persistent smell of cheap cologne mixed with something pharmaceutical that didn't belong in this house. There were strips of paper with "Happy Birthday," poorly inflated balloons, mismatched garlands, and a long, hastily set table full of plates that no one touched. People were talking, but without the joy that fills silences. They were small talk, random phrases, smiles that fell away when no one was looking. Jake soon spotted 3 men who didn't fit in. They didn't greet each other, they didn't eat any food, and they seemed more attentive to the doors than to the people. Maya, as soon as she saw her grandmother in the main chair, understood that the center of the party was on hold. Rose was present, but her presence seemed sustained by something that took away her voice and brilliance. Rose was wearing a light blue dress, one of those she herself carefully curated for important occasions. She had always been flirtatious in her own way, with her hair tied back in a tight bun and lips painted a discreet pink. But that afternoon something was off. Her vacant gaze, her heavy eyelids, her mouth barely open as if words couldn't find a way out. Maya knew her too well to believe it was fatigue. That woman had cooked, laughed, and told stories until well into the early hours of more than one Christmas. Seeing her now motionless, barely reacting to greetings, was like witnessing a falsified version of the person she remembered. Sierra approached quickly, a drink in her hand, saying there was nothing to worry about, that it was just a thing of age. That rehearsed phrase made Maya feel a chill run down her spine. It wasn't an explanation, it was an argument to end questions. Jake, meanwhile, couldn't stop scanning the room. He noticed every detail that seemed out of place. The lack of family photos on the walls, which were always filled with portraits, the almost non-existent music that cut out every few minutes, and those guests no one recognized. The atmosphere wasn't one of celebration, but of surveillance. At one point, Jake stepped aside on the pretext of checking the garden, and there he found a disturbing discovery. Wires sticking out from under the porch, clumsily hidden, as if someone had installed a recording system at the last minute. He gestured to Maya from a distance, without arousing suspicion, and calmly returned. She understood instantly. Something was happening behind the birthday facade, and Grandma in the armchair was the centerpiece of a plan they had yet to fully unravel. Maya tried to approach her grandmother to speak to her, hoping to find even a gesture of complicity. Rose barely raised her gaze, murmured "my girl" in a weak voice, and closed her eyes again. That whisper was enough to confirm that she was conscious, but trapped in an artificial cloud not due to her age, but rather due to overmedication. Maya squeezed her hand, cold and trembling, feeling helpless at not being able to get her out of there. Right now. Sierra appeared again, smiling too broadly, and placed a glass of soda in front of Maya. There was no affection in her gesture, only the intention to keep her busy and distracted. Maya looked her up and down and noticed the tension hidden beneath the smile. She was the same sister as always, masked with cordiality but with venom in every movement. Jake wasn't satisfied with what he'd seen in the shed. Pretending to go through the drawers of a side table that held the tablecloths, he discovered several pill bottles without clear labels, some with torn-off paper, others with capsules haphazardly mixed together. He took his phone and photographed each one with precision, knowing that such evidence could make all the difference. He returned to Maya's side and whispered just the right amount. "They're drugging her." Her world collapsed into silence, as if the muted music in the background became even more distant. She felt her legs tremble, but she forced herself to maintain her composure so as not to betray the growing alarm they could no longer ignore. Maya's father entered the room with the same authority as always, that heavy air that imposed silence more out of fear than respect. He wore a dark suit, too formal for a family party, and greeted the guests as if he owned the place, as if everything that happened there was under his control. When he saw Rose in the armchair, he barely nodded and moved on, as if his mother's weakened presence were a minor detail. Maya watched him with a knot in her stomach. That coldness confirmed what she was already beginning to suspect. This wasn't a birthday party. It was a carefully staged performance. Jake didn't miss one detail. A man dressed in a white coat stood near the kitchen, carrying a dark bag. He didn't speak to anyone, didn't say hello, and didn't have the demeanor of a guest. Every so often he checked the bag with quick movements, as if checking that what he was carrying was ready for use. Jake took another photo without anyone noticing and returned to Maya. He didn't need to say anything, because the look on both their faces already made it clear that the situation was dangerous. Rose, half asleep, was breathing heavily, and Maya felt that time was beginning to run out. The murmur of the party became strange to Maya, as if everyone was speaking a language she couldn't decipher. The background music repeatedly interrupted, leaving awkward gaps of silence that seemed to reinforce the tension. Sierra paced back and forth, drink in hand, greeting each guest with exaggerated hugs and forced laughter. When someone asked how Rose was feeling, she immediately responded that everything was normal, that Grandma was perfectly fine for her age. Maya, however, watched her grandmother sink further into the chair, as if life were slipping away from her in slow motion. If you've read this far, leave me a comment telling me where you're following us from. It's incredible to see how far these stories travel. It was a declaration of incapacity with Rose's forged signature. The air became even heavier. There was no longer any doubt that what was happening was a legal scheme disguised as a party, an ambush to rob Rose of everything that belonged to her. Jake returned to Maya's side and, in a barely audible voice, explained what he had found. She felt her blood boil as she imagined her own sister and father forging Grandma's signature to declare her incompetent. Suddenly, everything fell into place. The unknown men, the presence of the supposed doctor, the hidden medications, Sierra's exaggerated attitude. The party was just a smokescreen, a poorly disguised show to legitimize a scam they'd been preparing for some time. Maya gritted her teeth to keep control, because she knew any sudden gesture could alert those behind the plan. She forced herself to smile, to merge with the guests as if nothing had happened, but inside, indignation consumed her. Jake, meanwhile, discreetly took out his phone and took more photos of the living room, the jars, and even the supposed doctor who was still standing watch in the kitchen. Each image was evidence that could save Rose. Maya approached the armchair, stroked her grandmother's hand, and silently promised her she wouldn't leave her alone. A different determination shone in her moist eyes, that of someone who knows the time has come to face the truth, no matter how painful it may be. The toast began with Sierra standing in the center of the room, raising her glass and delivering a speech filled with empty phrases. She spoke of Rose's strength, of family unity, and of the importance of celebrating together, but every word sounded hollow and lacking in conviction. Her father nodded with a stiff smile as if confirming each lie. The guests, unaware of the gravity of what was happening, applauded half-heartedly. Maya watched from a corner, her heart sinking, feeling as if she were watching a play in which everyone, except her and Jake, was following a perverse script. Jake took advantage of the moment to move discreetly. He took new photos, capturing the moment Sierra toasted in front of the practically sedated grandmother, and also the expressions of the unknown men, attentive to her every move. It was clear they were there to control the situation, not to celebrate. Maya looked at her grandmother and tried to speak to her again, leaning toward her ear. Rose opened her eyes with difficulty and barely murmured her granddaughter's name, a sigh that was enough to confirm that she was still conscious, although trapped under the influence of the drugs. That moment gave Maya the strength she needed to resist and not give in to her fear. Jake, aware that the situation could turn dangerous at any moment, went back out into the hallway pretending to be on a call. From there, he sent a quick text to an acquaintance in the local police force, briefly explaining what was happening and sharing the address. He knew he couldn't call directly without arousing suspicion, but he needed to secure backup before any irreversible steps were taken. Meanwhile, he watched from a distance as Sierra and her father communicated with discreet gestures to the men on the corners, as if waiting for the exact moment to act. Maya, seeing Jake return with a more serious face than usual, understood that everything was speeding up. The atmosphere in the room was stifling, the forced laughter, the barely playing music, and the uncomfortable glances of those who sensed something wasn't right. Suddenly, she saw the supposed doctor approach the chair where Rose was, the dark bag hanging from one arm and a subtle movement that revealed a syringe. Maya's heart began to pound, a deafening sound in her chest that only calmed when Jake, with a firm stride, stood in her way, feigning small talk to slow him down for a few more minutes. The so-called doctor stepped back with an awkward smile, putting the syringe back in its bag. Jake had held him off long enough, but they knew they couldn't sustain that tension much longer. Maya, breathing heavily, leaned toward her grandmother again and whispered to her to hang on, that she wasn't alone. Rose blinked slowly, as if wanting to respond, and that small gesture was enough for Maya to reaffirm her resolve. She wouldn't allow them to take her away in that condition. Desperation transformed into a quiet strength, that of someone no longer afraid to break the facade. Maya's father noticed the exchange and walked toward them with a stiff expression. He leaned forward in his chair, patted his mother's shoulder with a curt gesture, and without looking at her, gave Maya a cold stare, as if warning her not to interfere. Jake immediately stood at her side, standing tall, conveying with his very presence that they would not back down. The atmosphere became so tense that even the guests sensed it. The chatter ceased, the applause died down, and all that could be heard was the clinking of glasses as they landed on the table. Everything was about to explode. Jake knew every second counted. Pretending to search the kitchen for napkins, he reapproached the supposed doctor and managed to capture a close-up photograph of the syringe and the dark bag. That image would be definitive proof that there was an active plot against Rose. Meanwhile, Maya stood by her grandmother, gently stroking her hand, trying to convey calm, even though inside she was overwhelmed with fear. She felt her whole body trembling, but she couldn't show it. She had to appear steadfast to protect her. In the living room, Sierra tried to restore the festive atmosphere, raising her voice with exaggerated comments and forced laughter. She greeted the guests, offered drinks, and asked for photos, but her gaze constantly shifted toward Maya, gauging her every move. It was clear she suspected her resistance, although she had no proof to confront her at the moment. The father, on the other hand, remained in a corner with a drink in his hand, observing everything with a disturbing calm, as if he knew he was in control. For Maya, that calm was even more dangerous than Sierra's nervous gestures. Jake finally received the confirmation he'd been waiting for. His contact at the police station sent him a message saying a patrol car was on the way. The relief was instant, although the tension was still unbearable. He discreetly showed the screen to Maya, and she felt like she could breathe a little more deeply for the first time all afternoon. Still, they couldn't let their guard down. The men on the corners continued to watch their every move, and the supposed doctor hadn't strayed far. Everything indicated that if they didn't act carefully, they might try to get Rose out of the house before the officers arrived. Outside, the night seemed darker than usual. The cold air brushed Maya's face, and every step toward the door felt like a battle against despair. They knew they were very close to the end, but they couldn't declare victory yet. The officers arrived minutes later, marching firmly through the front door. The sound of boots against the wooden floor abruptly cut the murmur to a halt. The men who had been standing in the corners tried to disappear into the crowd, but were quickly detained for identification. Sierra froze, still holding the glass, feigning surprise, while Maya's father maintained a serious expression, as if he still believed he had control of the situation. The room, previously filled with fake murmurs, transformed into a tense and silent space. The officers began searching the house. They found the wires hidden under the shed, the unlabeled medication bottles on the side table, and finally, the disability statement with Rose's forged signature. Each discovery confirmed what Jake had documented with photos. When they questioned the supposed doctor, his nervousness was evident. He couldn't clearly explain what he was doing there or where the drugs came from. Maya, standing next to her grandmother, felt a lump in her throat when she heard her say, in a weak but firm voice, that she wasn't sick, that she had just been sedated. Those words were enough to crumble the facade she had built up over weeks. Sierra tried to save the day with a nervous laugh, saying it was all a misunderstanding, that the medications were simply supplements, and that the document found had no legal validity. But the officers confronted her with the photos and signature comparisons proving the forgery. The father, on the other hand, opted for silence, a strategy that ended up condemning him further because his coldness in the face of the accusation was impossible to justify. The guests, confused and fearful, began to slowly leave, leaving the room almost empty. No one wanted to witness what was happening firsthand. Ultimately, the police decided to take Sierra, the father, and the supposed doctor away on charges of fraud and elder abuse. Maya watched as they were led out in handcuffs through the same door she had entered hours earlier with such anxiety. It was a bittersweet moment. She didn't feel joy, but rather a mixture of sadness and relief. Seeing her own family in that situation was painful, but at the same time, it was confirmation that the truth had come out. Jake hugged her tightly, as if assuring her that they had done the right thing and that, although the legal process would be long, the most important thing was that Rose was safe. Rose was immediately rushed to the hospital. There, after several hours of examination, the doctors confirmed what Maya and Jake suspected. There wasn't an illness to explain her condition, but rather an uncontrolled overuse of sedatives. This news was a hard blow, but also a relief because it meant that with the right treatment, her grandmother could recover. Maya spent the entire night sitting by her side, holding her hand, talking to her even as she slept soundly. Simply seeing her breathe without the same effort she had hours before gave her some hope. In that cold hospital environment, Maya had time to think about everything she'd been through. For years, she'd carried the guilt of distancing herself from her family, as if the breakup had been her fault. That night, she realized she'd made the right decision to walk away. What happened at the party wasn't an accident, but proof of how far ambition could take them. Looking at Jake, dozing in an uncomfortable chair, clutching his phone full of evidence, she felt infinite gratitude. They'd faced the trap together, and although the wound hurt, they'd also found a strength they didn't know they had. The following days were filled with paperwork, statements, and visits from social workers seeking to ensure Rose's well-being. Maya remained steadfast at every step, handing over documents, showing photos, and recounting in detail what she had experienced that afternoon. Jake, for his part, organized folders with all the material he had collected, images of the medications, the alleged doctor, the hidden wires, the forged signature. Each piece of evidence strengthened the accusation and weakened any defense Sierra and her father could take. It was exhausting, but also liberating, because each legal step meant moving Rose a little further away from manipulation. As the days passed, Rose began to regain vitality. Her voice, once weak and shaky, sounded clear again. Her eyes regained the sparkle that had always characterized her, and she even joked with the nurses, reminding them that she still had much to teach. For Maya, seeing her laugh again was the greatest reward. She realized that not only had they protected her grandmother, but they had also broken away from years of family toxicity that seemed inevitable. That night at the house, which could have ended in tragedy, became the turning point that allowed Maya to close one cycle and begin another with greater dignity and peace. Maya understood that that night had marked a turning point in her life. Seeing her father and sister handcuffed didn't bring her satisfaction, but rather a bitter mix of confirmation and liberation. She realized she hadn't been wrong to keep her distance all those years. What did bring her peace was having stood up for the one person who had always been on her side. Rose wasn't just her grandmother. She was the pillar of her childhood, and the woman who taught her that true kindness existed even in the midst of betrayal. Over time, she stopped carrying the guilt of estrangement. She learned that not all families fulfill the role they should, and that protecting those you love can mean confronting even your own blood ties. Jake was her inseparable companion in that fight, and together they closed a chapter marked by pain to open another, where loyalty and genuine care prevailed. Every time she saw her grandmother smile again, Maya felt that all the suffering of that day had been worth it. That in the end was the true victory.